This time, Ethan Jacko is going to present our message for us.
All right, good morning, church. Happy Sabbath. So, a couple weeks ago, well, actually, it was the end of last year, Mr. Dan invited me here. I was not able to attend, and very recently invited me again, so I was able to come this time around. And today I'm going to present to you a message that I covered. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So I'm going to cover a message that I did at the Wilson Church last year. We had an evangelistic series, and I got a lot of really good feedback on this. A lot of people learned some new stuff, so I hope you find it very interesting. It is a two-part message that I have combined into one part for today, and we're going to be going through some stuff pretty fast for the sake of time, and I'll explain why I'll be going through it fast in a minute. But the first part, the series is called The Disaster and Its Engineer. We'll be going through modern-day natural disasters, and then we'll be talking about modern interpretations of the disasters after that. So first, we are going to go over 4 different types of disasters, but before we do, let's open up with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here today, and thank you for bringing me here, and may what I say be found acceptable in your sight. Amen. So for the sake of time, I'm only going to go over 4 different types of disasters, and I'll be giving only 3 examples for each one, because what I'm going to be doing is barely scratching the surface. There's been so many in the past 5 years. So the first one is wildfires. This one, there's one particular example that's so epic, I only used one example. So on August 16th through 17th of the year 2020, 38 separate fires were ignited by lightning strikes. By August 30th, the 4 largest fires, the Doe, Tantham, the Doe, Tantham, and Glade, as well as the Hull fires. That's what the 4 of the 38, those were the largest, and they eventually joined and further increased when they combined into an Elkhorn fire, which is a separate fire that was towards the western coast of California. And they all ended up just becoming this one massive fire by September the 10th, and then upgraded its name to the August Complex. And by the time it was all said and done, that ended up being 650 different wildfires that combined and burned over 1 million acres, which is larger than the state of Rhode Island, and over 900 structures were destroyed. And that happened just less than 3 years ago. So again, we're going to be going through this real fast. Once I finish covering the disasters, I'll explain why in a minute. But put that in the back burner, because we're going to go into the next type of disaster, and those are tornadoes. Now, tornadoes are kind of interesting because they're similar to hurricanes, which I'll be covering next, but they're a little different because they're more unpredictable, and they're like a smaller, concentrated version of a hurricane. Having grown up in Indiana in the earlier part of my life, anybody who's been to the Midwest, or at least Indiana, knows that this is a pretty common cameo to see in that part of the U.S. Every spring you get plenty of those. I mean, probably a month from now we'll be seeing on the news they have plenty of tornadoes out there. Oklahoma, anybody knows that there's lots of tornadoes out there. I'm very thankful we don't have them too often here. So there are, actually I didn't mean to have that up there. It's a link. I'm not going to open it up, but I would recommend checking it out. It is from the NOAA National Weather Service. It covers the year 2011. We had a massive outbreak of tornadoes in the year 2011. It was called the 2011 Super Outbreak. Check it out. A lot of crazy stuff. They have an entire list. There were just so many tornadoes, and out of them we had the Joplin tornado. For any of you may remember, in Missouri, we had a massive tornado that went through and destroyed a lot of homes. Actually took out a hospital. Tuscaloosa, EF4, EF5 tornadoes that went through Alabama. It's a long list. I'm not going to be going over it because I'm not going to bother trying to open up the link. But just keep that in mind. If you guys want to do some more research, which I highly recommend, don't just take my word for it. With all the stuff I show you, do your own research. So this is actually kind of interesting because I know a fellow who assessed the damage of this tornado. This was the Maysville, Kentucky tornado back in 2021. So I think he might have even been here. Stephen Ledger, he actually assessed a lot of the damage that happened here. So it was an EF4, and these are pictures he actually sent me from his phone. So it was an EF4, and there were 57 casualties. Now, when comparing a tornado to a hurricane, there's only one good thing about it. Typically, even though they're very unpredictable, they don't last very long on the ground. This tornado that went through Maysville, Kentucky was the exception. This thing was on the ground for almost 3 hours. If you're lucky, they'll last half an hour. So this massive tornado that absolutely just leveled entire communities was on the ground for 3 hours, and it went through 3 different states, which is almost unheard of. Like, there's only been like maybe 2 instances in U.S. history that's ever happened. Now, let me go over to the next one real quick. Again, we're going to be going through a lot of stuff here. Hurricanes. Again, similar to tornadoes, but they're larger, more predictable, kind of, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. As you can see here in a picture, we have water level being pretty high there. A mother cow with her 2 cows, and the mother cow is standing on the front porch looking very concerned about her insurance premiums. This is a screenshot I took. It's interesting. Since I have composed this message, there have been at least 3 major massive natural disasters that have occurred that I haven't even put in here. Well, except for this one. There was 2 other ones I'll mention in a minute. But this is a screenshot I took on my computer from the Weather Channel Doppler. It is Hurricane Ian. This was a massive, I think when it made landfall, Category 4 hurricane that leveled Fort Myers. It did some incredible damage. I watched it when it made landfall, and it was impressive. I don't know if you guys ever saw the footage when it was actually making landfall, but there were some insane wind speeds. The surge, it was just pumping. It was, as the meteorologist put it, it was the worst case scenario for Fort Myers because of where it was positioned geographically. So today I'm going to cover only 3 different types of hurricanes that have happened in the past 5 or 6 years. 2 of them hit North Carolina, 1 of them didn't. But each one of these had very interesting characteristics to them when they made landfall. Matthew, which we all know, hit North Carolina. Harvey didn't, but Dorian did kind of, so let's go into them. So the first one is Matthew. It became a Category 5 hurricane on September the 30th, 2016 in the Caribbean Sea. It made landfall in McLeanville. I'm saying that wrong, aren't I? Well, anyways, I tried. On October the 8th, and it was a Category 2 when it made landfall. Now, the reason why I'm covering this is we actually were here at this church when it was making landfall. I remember Mr. Dan was having children's story that day. I remember you had the box. That day, we were here that day when it happened. But it was a massively powerful hurricane, even though it was like a 2 to a dying 1. What it did when it came up, because it hit Florida as like a 4, it cruised up the coast, half on land, half on water. So it was maintaining its strength, just sucking in water and dumping it on the other side. And we ended up, those casualties you see, the reason why I put 25 casualties in North Carolina is because more people died in North Carolina than South Carolina. And the reason for that is because there was a dam that busted in Lumberton. They were not expecting that kind of damage to happen. They were not expecting all of that kind of destruction to happen. South Carolina was braced for it. North Carolina was not. It was a sight to behold. I mean, that picture that I actually showed you with the cows, that was in Lumberton. But there was areas where water was up to the roofs. So Harvey was an interesting situation because it stalled a little bit. So it was a Category 4 when it made landfall on August 24 through 25 on 2017 in San Jose Island, Texas, and there were over 100 deaths. So it slowed down, if I recall correctly, it actually slowed down to like 4 or 5 miles an hour, which for a massive storm, that's pretty bad, but it's still maintaining its strength. And it dumped 40 inches of rain, and it was within like almost a 24-hour period. I mean, you think about 40 inches of rain in like 24 hours That's rivers, or because you got all kinds of rivers, that dumps into the Texas. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but you got a lot of rivers that feed in to the ocean. They're like the Galveston area. That you've got rivers are just jumping feet within hours when you got something like that. Then the last one, and I saved the best for last, Dorian. Now this one didn't personally impact us that bad, but what this thing did was so insane, I had to put it in here. It was a Category 5 hurricane. It was a monster one. I mean, we had wind gusts up to 160 miles an hour. And it hit Elbow Cay on the Bahamas on September the 1st, 2019. And it stalled. Well, it didn't exactly stall. I should correct that and say it stopped on Elbow Cay for at least 24 hours. This thing actually sat on the Bahamas for over 24 hours. This thing was actually, because I remember it slowed down. It was like 2 or 3 miles an hour, and then once it got to those islands, that massive storm actually stopped there. Some of the survivors described it as a combination between a tornado, a hurricane, and a tsunami, and I believe it considering the extreme conditions they went through for over 24 hours. It was the strongest hurricane ever documented in the northern Bahamas, which is pretty insane considering the Bahamas has got a pretty bad history. And I just put this together because I thought it was funny, because the year 2020 was so insane. These are a list of hurricanes that hit in just the Gulf of Mexico region. I actually left one out by accident when I composed this, but this is just all of them that hit within 2020. Cristobal, June 7th. Marco, August 24. Laura, August 27, Delta at October 9, and then Zeta at October 28. You know, when you got the first letter of a name for a hurricane at a Z, you know it's a bad year. These all hit within just a few months, and some of these hit the same area within less than 2 weeks. In fact, some areas like the Mobile, Alabama, actually, the eye wall went over the same place twice in some occasions. It was really insane. The one I accidentally left out was Sally, because that hit like the Panhandle, which was a Category 4, and that did some really bad damage too. So anyways, let's put that in the back burner as we jump over to our last form of natural disaster, which are earthquakes. These are going to be some older examples, but they are certainly reminders of what is yet to come. So we have the 2011 Japanese earthquake and tsunami, 2007 Southern Sumatra Indonesian earthquakes, and then the 1960 Valdivia earthquake and tsunami. So we have, everybody probably remembers this, the Japanese earthquake. I mean, that was bad. The tsunami came in and just leveled stuff, and then of course shortly after that we had nuclear concerns. I mean, that was essentially a disaster that affected almost the whole world in a way. It was pretty bad. And there was over 18,000 casualties, and it rated as a 9.0 on the Richter scale. The next one was, and this one actually I don't think is as well known, but the reason why I put it in here was because of the magnitude of it. See, the Southern Sumatra Indonesian earthquakes rated between a 7.0 and an 8.4, and there was only 25 casualties. I mean, any casualties is bad, but the reason why I put this in here was because there was a ton of these. This wasn't a single 9.0 like with Japan. There was a ton of these. There was like 6 or 7 7.0s all hitting at the same time over and over and over and over again. Just kind of unusual. Usually you have one big one and a bunch of aftershocks. This one was just relentless as far as the nature of it goes. Now, the last one, this one, I put this in here, again, I like to stay with more modern examples, but I put this one in here because this is the strongest one ever recorded on the Richter scale. This was in Chile, the Valdivia earthquake of 1960. It was between 9.4 and a 9.6 magnitude. Death toll is uncertain, somewhere between 1,000 to 6,000. When you got something like that, you take estimates. And this is the wildest part. The earthquake itself lasted for 10 minutes and caused a 35-foot tall tsunami that devastated Hilo, Hawaii, 6,200 miles away. Remember, this is Chile. And then there's Hawaii. They're like two different hemispheres. You think about that for a minute. How massive that wave was when it left Chile, to be a 35-foot wave when it hit Hawaii. That's incredible. So the question is there need to be afraid? So in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 6, it says, "Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear nor be afraid of them, for the Lord your God, he is the one who goes with you, and he will not leave you nor forsake you." This was a verse in the Bible where the Israelites were in the wilderness, and they were afraid that some of the neighboring nations were going to conquer them. This is God's response to them, and it still applies to us today. So I want you to really pay attention to this verse right here. And we're actually going to revisit it again, but in a different book, different part of the Bible. "For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places." So this was Jesus talking to his disciples, because when Jesus was telling everybody, "I'm going to return again," his disciples took him aside and asked him, "When is that going to be?" This was Jesus' response. It was very plain. There was no parables. There was no confusion of translating anything. It was just very direct. So Jesus said there was going to be famines. There was going to be pestilences. There was going to be earthquakes. There was going to be bad times. So in other words, when we see these things happening, it shouldn't surprise us. I mean, it's natural to be like in shock if you've personally experienced something like that. But the fact that the event occurred should not surprise us, because Jesus said these things were going to happen again before he returned. Now we're going to discuss the second part of this series, and that is the engineer behind the disaster. You see, there's another translation, there's another interpretation of why these things happen. Climate change. This is something that's emerged somewhat recently. It's been around for a good time now, but it is something that's becoming more and more popular, more generally accepted. The thing about climate change is there are some components to it that aren't often brought up. We see it every day. You turn on the news. I mean, when do you turn on the news and not see something about climate change? It's like every day you see it. So we're going to go to some very interesting information about climate change and how it correlates with the Bible in a way, shall we say. And you'll understand what I mean by that when we get into it a little further. So, what is climate change, and furthermore, what is global warming? And global warming was kind of an older term. I think it meant for the whole Earth, but climate change is what we're going to be specifically focusing on. So climate change, in the fewest of words, its definition is as human beings, you are creating CO2 from man-made devices. As a result of that, the CO2 is being emitted into the atmosphere, and it creates this blanket that the CO2 is being trapped, causing what they call the greenhouse effect. Now, the greenhouse effect, they say, is what's causing abnormal weather patterns. Everything's becoming warmer. We're seeing temperatures that are record-breaking. We're seeing stuff where more disasters in some areas are happening way more than they used to. That is the definition of climate change in the fewest of words. And this is yet another link. I would recommend, if you want to look up the definition of climate change, this is a link from NASA that just talks about what it is. It's just a really plain definition, because it is kind of, the overall theory of it itself is actually kind of complex. I just tried to keep it as plain as possible. So, is climate change dangerous to Christians? Now, this is where things get kind of interesting, because the properties of climate change, when I did this message, I got a lot of feedback. People told me they never even heard of this stuff before. I was really glad about that, because there's a lot of properties of climate change people do not understand. Well, not understand. They don't know about, or at least it was not ever presented to them. They just hear about it, but they're not told about the layers of climate change, because climate change has layers to it. The top layers, the surface layers we most commonly see, are like the political layers. Those are the layers when we turn into the news. So-and-so supports climate change, or so-and-so is against climate change. Those are the surface layers. But we're going to go down to the very core of climate change, because that's the origin of it. And those are the true intentions behind climate change. Who's behind it? So climate change, I want to just make this clear before I even go further. Climate change is not a political matter. It is a religious matter. Again, there's layers to this. I'm not going to be going into, oh, I support so-and-so politicians or I'm against so-and-so politicians. I'm just going to be stating the facts. This is what climate change is. I could spend hours talking about climate change and not breathe a word about politics, because it's not. Politicians are the people who play the instrument, but they are not the instrument. So this is a slide I put together. It is a comparison of climate change and evolution. And for those of you who might be a little confused, why am I actually putting this next to evolution? You'll understand why in a minute. So climate change is a theory. And it is. I mean, originally when it about the same time it came out, it was referred to as the theory of global warming. It's not called that anymore. And interestingly enough, evolution is the same way. They don't usually call it a theory anymore, but it still is. Climate change says there is no God, and evolution says there is no God. Things will become better if we do what it takes to prevent climate change, and evolution says things will always become better as time progresses. Climate change explains what is going to happen, and evolution explains what has happened in the past. Now, you'll notice I've highlighted several words here. I have highlighted, of course, there is no God, and I highlighted the word better. The reason why, obviously, I've highlighted there is no God, a lot of people apparently just don't know about this because it's not heavily advertised in the media. They're not trying to address the fact that it's an atheistic core, because that's going to scare away a lot of Christians. They want more people on the climate change boat, right? It's a strategy. So that is kind of if you're a Christian, you're not sure which side of the fence to stand on with climate change, that one will obviously deter you. But again, like I said, you're not going to find this very often in the media. When you do, it actually usually is in the discussion of evolution. They typically correlate how the Earth is millions of years old with climate change. But there's another characteristic, and this one I really want to heavily focus on, because I will say it's about as bad, if not worse, than the fact that it says there is no God, and that is the idea that things will become better. Now, don't get me wrong. Thinking optimistically, hoping that things will get better is not a bad thing. But let me ask you this. Since the time Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden until right now, have things gotten better? And from right now until Jesus comes, are things going to get better? So there it is. You have the complete opposite of what the Bible says. This is an atheistic agenda that is the polarity of what the Bible teaches. Even if you put God into the equation, because I'll discuss that a little bit later, there are Christian derivatives of climate change that are trying to put into society today as well. Now, I want to make a quick disclaimer before I even go any further. By no means, when I say that I don't support climate change, I'm not supporting trashing the earth. Because climate change isn't just about a clean environment. You see, climate change covers the CO2 emissions and all that. And oftentimes you will see, let's keep the earth green, let's keep the earth clean. You will see that. But how many of us here remember before climate change came out, was it told to keep the earth clean? Did keeping the earth clean come first? So those are two different agendas. Now, obviously you want to keep the earth clean. You're supposed to be good stewards of God's planet. A couple months ago, we were driving down the road. It was one of those back roads, two-way country roads, and there was this pickup truck in front of us, and the passenger just decided to roll down his window. He just started chucking trash out. And I don't mean like candy bars. I mean, he was cleaning out the car. I mean, it was bad. I mean, he dirtied like half a mile of the road. And then he made a right and turned it at the county dump. Don't be like that. That's not being a good steward. But what I'm trying to clarify here is just because you don't support climate change does not mean you're supporting littering. Those are two completely different topics. The reason why you see them bundled together, because this is where politics to get into play, politicians bundle the two together because they know, hey, nobody wants to litter. So if nobody wants to litter, then hey, if we bundle that into the climate change package, nobody will question climate change. They want to get as many people on board as possible for their political campaign. So that's why you see those two associated together, but I want to make it very clear those two topics are two very different things. You can talk about one without the other. Anyways, okay. Here's two more concerning characteristics that I put in regards to climate change. The number one is the rate at which it's being accepted. Again, this is a theory. You don't ever hear people say that anymore, but it's a theory. According to the scientific method on how you test things, it's a theory. There are some assumptions being made. There are some calculations they're not 100% sure about. They can't fill in all the gaps, but they feel somewhat confident about this. But again, it's a theory. It's a theory that's being widely accepted. And the second one is the number of laws that are being established or wanting to be established for the sake of climate change. This is kind of the funny part I like to talk about because in New Zealand, as of somewhat recently, there was a tax that was put out because there was a tax that was put on farmers because the cows and the sheep were farting too much. They were claiming that the methane emissions were enough to contribute to the greenhouse effect. So we're taxing gas from farm animals now. You know, there's an old saying that says there's two things guaranteed in life, taxes and death. And climate change just managed to get into one of them. Places like Newark and California have actually banned the sales of gas-powered vehicles for the sake of climate change. And again, it's not so much the law I'm trying to get you guys to focus on. It's the level of power of which, the level of authority of which climate change has obtained now. Climate change is reaching new heights in power. There are very powerful political figures, religious figures, that are now adapting to this and telling people that it is true. It's a theory. And there's no God in the equation. So what are the true causes for these events? What's behind all of this? We just kind of went over it again. We already went over it, but I'm going to do it again. Previously, we went over Matthew chapter 24, verse 7. This time, I'm going to be going to Mark 13, verse 8, and you'll see why I picked this one in a minute. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be earthquakes in various places, and there will be famines and troubles. These are the beginnings of sorrows. What's interesting about this verse is if you bend back 3 verses, Jesus had previously been telling his disciples, and Jesus answering them began to say, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and will deceive many." I find it no coincidence that Jesus said, make sure not to be deceived, right before he started talking about natural disasters and the end-time events. I find that to be no coincidence. So who is the engineer behind climate change? Because again, it's a theory. There's no God in it. Religious figures like the Pope have even adapted it and said that God is causing climate change, but that wouldn't make any sense if the original theory didn't have God to start with. I mean, you're doing some really quirky bends, some religious beliefs to really adapt that. So who's the engineer behind it? Well, look at what John chapter 8, verse 23 says. And this is Jesus talking to the Sadducees and Pharisees. And he said to them, "You are from beneath, I am from above. You are of this world, I am not of this world." As you will find throughout the New Testament, Jesus makes a very clear distinction between himself and the world. And that is because those are two completely different thinking processes. Climate change has no God in the equation. Sure, you can throw God into the equation and say he's there, but does that mean he's there? If it was originally atheistic, then that would have to mean it is of the world. And Jesus says he's not of the world. There's no gray area. There's nothing in between. You can't sit on the fence. You're on one side or the other. You are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. The Lord protects the unwary, and when I was brought low, he saved me. Who are you going to fear? What are you going to be afraid of? I mean, today, I'll see kids like this big, scared half to death, because the earth is going to burn up like 20 years from now. And they have to do everything that the people on the TV tell them to do to prevent it. Because they have no hope. They have nothing. Climate change has replaced the second coming. We have something to look forward to. Can we say amen to that? But when you take God out of the equation, what kind of second coming is that to look forward to? You know what I mean? Our earth has an expiration date. There's no question about that. That's something atheists and Christians can agree on. It's just what's going to happen that day is where the line is drawn. Who are you going to fear? Are you going to fear the scientists and all the politicians who will give you all these convincing facts and these big $5 words? Or are you going to fear the God who created the heavens and the earth and created the people who came up with the climate change theory, the one who's the boss of it all? Mr. Dan was saying this morning, why does bad things happen? Why does God not prevent them? There's another verse, I don't have it up here, but there's a verse where Jesus says, these things have to come to pass, then I will come. It's a fulfillment of prophecy. The reason why you see the devil working as hard as he is in regards to the explanation of these events is because you can't hide them. It's so plain. Two natural disasters occurred since I put this together. Actually, there was the earthquakes in Afghanistan, and there was the big ones in Turkey and Syria, which doubled the death tolls of the Japanese earthquake back in 2011. Nobody can ignore that, and it's hard to reinterpret it too. When it's a fulfillment of prophecy, that's where climate change comes in. There are people who don't want to accept that there is a God, there is a creator, and that's the next best thing. It is a religious pacifier, shall we say. So who are you going to fear? Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here today. And thank you that you've given us a hope to look forward to in the end, rather than try to keep this broken earth in one piece, for we know that a new heaven and a new earth will be made, and you will wipe away every tear. Thank you for bringing us here. Thank you for everything, Father. Amen.